Sure. Thank you, Lauren.
Thank
Hi,
you.
everyone. Happy Monday. I'm Benjamin Snyers. I'm leading social and performance for Ogilvy North America. And I will be the moderator for the session today. And with me, we have Chad Bitchell from TD Ameritrade, Vice President, Head of Content and Digital Platforms.
Hey,
Hi,
Benjamin.
Chad. How have you been?
I'm
well?
Great. You are one of the happiest people I've ever seen on a Monday.
Yeah, I know. And it's not my favorite day of the week. I usually prefer Friday, but I'm doing the extra effort. So today we want to talk with you all about a few things about commerce, obviously, but we want to talk about how you can intersect content and commerce really to create a big impact for your brand. So really what we are trying to highlight in this conversation is how combining storytelling and content really can drive performance. So we'll do this with Chad. What are the best ways to connect with the mind and the hearts of the consumer? So we'll have a conversation for 30 minutes, and then we would like to open it up to all the participants. So please, if you have a question, leave it in the Q&A. I will moderate, and we will be able to retrieve your question and discuss with Chad. But before we jump into the conversation, maybe let's do a quick round of introduction. So Chad, why don't you introduce yourself?
Sure, thanks, Benjamin. So Chad Mitchell, Head of Content and Digital Platforms at TD Bank. Head up our brand storytelling team that sits inside of our communications and public affairs entity at TD Bank. And prior to that, I've done a couple of stints in agency land, headed up the content team at Walmart for about 8 years. And prior to that was involved really in a lot of different things of dealing with politics, government relations, policy-oriented stuff in the DC area, and just have always found myself in communications roles and in storytelling, and probably wasn't exactly sure what it was 25 years ago, but now I know that it was storytelling. It was just storytelling around a candidate or a policy issue as opposed to a brand. So been doing that for quite some time and really enjoying what we're doing at TD Bank. I'm glad to be here to talk to you today.
Awesome. So I'm Benjamin Snyers. I come from Belgium. I started my career there in a startup called Radionomy that basically helped everyone create their web radio for free. And there I was in charge of digital marketing, sending newsletter, managing the blog, the forum, managing the social network, the search marketing, and all of that. Great experience. We didn't have a lot of budget, so we had to be very creative and really maximize how organic could impact everything we did. Then I created a company, Social Lab, a social media marketing agency with 3 business partners. In Belgium, we grew the company in Europe, France, and Amsterdam. And in 2013, WPP acquired the company. That's when I joined the amazing Ogilvy family. In 2015, I moved to New York to launch the social team within Ogilvy in the US. And right now I'm in charge of the social and performance team across North America. We have people who do media, content creation, influencer marketing, social marketing across North America, New York, DC, Chicago, Toronto, and the West Coast. All right, are you ready, Chad? I have a few questions for you. I did my homework, I prepared. So I have a few. But the first one would be more of a personal question, and it's related to COVID. So what I really would like to know is how have you tweaked your day-to-day? What's your COVID hack? What have you changed in your life to make the whole COVID experience a more enjoyable experience?
It was the really cost-affordable wine from Trader Joe's that we've been partaking in over the last year to get us through it. They do have fantastically priced wine that is delicious, by the way. I did find that out during COVID. I wasn't much of a wine buyer from Trader Joe's, but in reality, I think for me, Benjamin, it was more about building out some time with my family. I am based in the Northern Virginia area. TD Bank is in Mount Laurel, so I was on the road a lot. Our team has pretty much always been, what we're now referring to as hybrid. But we were dispersed. I had a couple folks in New York City. I had a couple folks in the New Jersey area. I was obviously down here in the Northern Virginia area, and so there wasn't a lot that we needed to do from a team standpoint. There wasn't a lot that we needed to do to adjust to work. It was just more, I was home all the time. And I think that got frustrating for my family. It probably got a little frustrating for me. I like to be out and about with my team. I like to travel for work, whether it was to New York, New Jersey. And so for us, it was really about creating some difference or differences during the week. So Thursday became a big pizza night for us, trying all of the local pizza in the Northern Virginia area that would deliver. We started binge watching shows that we hadn't watched, and then I had my daughter was wrapping up her senior year in high school and getting ready to go to college, and nobody knew what that was going to look like until it happened. So there was a lot of family time built around the TV and getting out where we could, and sneaking off for trips with just the four of us, or being able to see my parents in very sort of buttoned up situations. So we just tried to make the best of it. But I've read the stories about people who have taken up new hobbies or read a lot of books, and I didn't do a lot of that. So I can't look back over the last 12, 14 months and say that I fundamentally changed my life or started an exercise routine or started, I've always enjoyed cooking. I've always enjoyed yard work. They're two things that actually de-stress me. So I did a lot of those, and then just tried to adapt and do the best that you could during a tough situation.
Awesome. So you didn't start baking?
No, we stopped when you ran out of yeast, and as we all saw, there were supply chain problems with a lot of different things, and so whether it was the toilet paper scarcity or then not being able to get yeast, we were not baking as much as other people. We were on the short end of the stick in terms of getting yeast, and now when we go to Sam's Club or any of those places, I see 50-pound bags of yeast. So get your yeast now in case we end up locked down again.
In case it's too late. Okay.
Yeah.
Well, glad to hear it brought you closer to your family. I think it's a really nice answer. What about your team? How did you and your team adapt to COVID? Did it change anything, the way you work remotely?
Well, a little bit, Benjamin. I think that as a content creator and in charge of our editorial strategy, in charge of creating content and distributing it every day, one of the things I was never successful in doing at Walmart was bringing in this idea of like a daily scrum, a morning meeting where we could look at the calendar and plan things out. And, during COVID, what we were able to do was get the team together for a lot of different reasons, but one of them was checking in with each other in the morning to make sure we knew what was going on during the day. And I think what we've all seen over the last 14 months is you had COVID, then we had sort of massive social justice movements across the country that just required content creators and distributors to be really on top of their game. So having those morning meetings allowed us to really stay on top of it. But as I mentioned to you before, we've always been pretty remote or hybrid. And so when I've gone up to New Jersey, I was typically up in the office 2 or 3 days a week. And then, my team would try to get in, or I would go to New York to be with the other members of my team. And so we were always, I think, a combination of FaceTime and then not FaceTime, and going to COVID where we were just all on the computers. It wasn't too much of a change for us. It wasn't terribly disruptive. I think we were able to find our jam. We were able to get into a groove pretty early on. I think as a people leader and as a people manager, one of the changes that we put in place and our leadership team at TD was really dispensing of a lot of the sort of office talk and the professional talk. So our one-on-ones became much more about personal connections and what's happening in your life and how can we help, and what could we do for people. I've got a team that's in a bunch of different situations. I've got single people who are living alone in apartments. I've got married people who are surrounded by family the way that I am. I've got one of my guys was engaged, so he's trying to plan a wedding. I've got another, so we had all these kinds of different situations. And so just having the opportunity to, visit with people on a personal level really allowed, I think, the bonds of our team to grow even more than they had when we were working together. So I will say that, we've seen all these stories about some of the businesses who are trying to return to work. We've seen some of the CEOs who have made some questionable statements about productivity. My team can be productive remote. We can be productive hybrid. We all want to see each other again because, we're communicators, we're type A's, we're extroverts. And so being around each other and the give and forth that goes with creating content through a natural conversation and seeing each other in an office is something that we're all looking forward to doing again. But we were never in an office 5 days a week. I don't think we'll ever be our content team. And so we found a good way to stay connected. I think 14 months now, 15 months, however long it's been, we're closer than we've ever been, and we just genuinely enjoy each other's companies. Our calls are the highlights of my days because they're funny, they're unpredictable. Somebody's always got a story, and so it's been not just making the best of a bad situation. It's sort of thriving, not just surviving, but thriving as a team.
Yeah, I love that you mentioned personal connection. I have to say we have seen the same thing happening at Ogilvy. For us, relationships are very important, and knowing how others are doing is also extremely important. But also talking about the simple things of the daily life. So we started reorganizing a new type of meeting, 101, taking breakfast together on Zoom, having a lunch, or even doing cooking class after work for the team. So we found ways to maintain that relationship going.
Yeah, likewise on our end. I think it's been critically important, and there's times where we've overdone it, and you can just tell by the look on people's faces that we're having yet another virtual happy hour. Really, do we need to do this again?
No virtual happy hour, no those ones.
We just have to find the right balance and give people the space they need. And when you opt out, you opt out, and if you opt in, you opt in. And we've now enforced some camera-free days, some meeting-free days, just to try to free people up, because I think we're all sort of guilty of probably having worked more from home than we ever did when we were in the office. There's no commute. There's no real long lunch hour. I think we've all been giving more than 110% for a long time. And so I think you're probably seeing the same thing I am, which is these reports of widespread burnout, and 50 to 55% of people are looking for a new job. And there's some talk about some sort of revolution in the workforce after this, in terms of, are people going to be looking for new jobs? And so we're just trying to be mindful of what our folks are going through.
Yeah, there is definitively some Zoom fatigue.
Yes.
And we have to manage the balance. So you mentioned the social justice movement, which is obviously a very important topic for all of us and a key moment in history. So can you tell us a little bit how you and your team have adapted, how you're embracing diversity and inclusion, how is changing the way TD Ameritrade is communicating?
It has been a very difficult year, for everybody. And for those of us that are not part of the African American community or Asian American community, I think reaching out to colleagues who are, and understanding what they're feeling and what they're going through and how you can be an ally is really critical. And I've been part of doing that. I've watched my team do that, and it's really about all of the different emotions that we're all going through, and how do you have what are really difficult conversations. And TD has built a very diverse and inclusive culture where these conversations are part of what we do. And so they've been awkward at times to have, but the company supports them. We're creating a platform, for people who have not typically had voice before. And so any role that my team and I can play in building a platform or creating content that gives rise to those underserved communities who haven't typically had a seat at the table and share their voice, share their experience. That's what we've been trying to do, from a content and storytelling standpoint. From a team standpoint, I think what it's done is it's really put a focus on being very careful about images that you're selecting, and making sure that you're bouncing ideas off of a lot of different people. And, we did this a lot at Walmart when I was there, and we do it at TD, where you sort of take stock of who's in the room. And if you look around and everybody looks like me, then we don't have the right people in the room. And we need to make sure that we're inviting the right people into the right meetings to weigh in on creative, or to take a look at something through their eyes to make sure, is this image capturing what we want to capture? Is this exploitative? Is this not exploitative? All of those sorts of things. And so I think, Benjamin, there's, how do you create an environment that can be supportive in tough times? And I think we've tried to do that, not only on my team, but on our broader communications and public affairs team and across the enterprise at TD. And then, what does it mean for a team that's creating content and developing stories? It's just, it's the extra scrutiny that you go through and the extra steps of a review process that you go through, to be just very careful about what you're putting into market and realizing the context behind what you're doing.
Okay, thank you. So Chad, obviously, as we can see, you are very passionate about your work and what you do every day. So when we talk about our job, at the center is really the work we produce. So maybe tell us, what's the piece of work that you have done that you are the most proud of with TD or even in a past life?
Well, yeah, I mean, at TD, it was last year, in the height of the pandemic, when the federal government rolled out the Paycheck Protection Program. And, we knew that TD was playing a big role in that. And within our footprint, we were the #1 lender to small businesses, which we've all heard about through this pandemic. Just the burden that small business has carried, and the impact that COVID has had on businesses having to shut down and lay people off, and being able to come back to work. And so we developed a series called Backbone of the Economy, and it really came from some talking points from our CEO about, the small businesses, the community partners that we work with being the backbone of the economy, and being the thing that was going to keep the economy moving forward, keep our communities moving forward. And we were able to go out and find some stories of people who, in a lot of cases, managed to do quite well. Whether they moved to mobile ordering, whether they moved to pick up, we had a coffee shop. I think one of the more unique stories was a place called Theater Works in Connecticut. And considering theaters were shut down, what were they able to bring to the community that was helpful and valuable? And when I think about, content that works, I think it's content that helps. Content that helps sells. And so, they were able to switch to your point. They did some cooking shows that had some flair to them because they're a theater company. They also then used their costume department to make PPE equipment. So, being able to find the stories of those folks, and then some of the things that our colleagues were doing to support the real heroes, which were the frontline workers, right? And the doctors and the nurses, and bringing meals, or creating or using their experience to make equipment for all of those people on the front lines, and making sure that we were very careful about the word heroics. I hear that word thrown around a lot, and I don't like it being assigned to a communications team. I don't think what we did was heroic. I think we did our job, but being able to tell the stories of the real heroes was sort of a highlight for us, and really enjoyed being able to tell those stories through the eyes of people, of the people who were living it, which I think then gives people a better sense as to our brand. And what I find to be unique and differentiated about TD are these stories. And when you get to read those stories and you get to interact with these people, I think you get a real feel for who we are as a company and who we are as a bank.
Yes. So obviously the pandemic has highly impacted the way we work, but it also opened the door for more innovation. And some people are asking in the Q&A, and it's a question I had, what are the trends, what are the innovation you have seen appearing in content production?
Yeah, so we're a bank. No secret, TD Bank. TD banks are not going to be your brand innovators, I don't think. When you think about this group that we're partnering with today, and when I think about innovative brands, and I look across the spectrum to see what brands are doing to move things forward, whether it's e-commerce. I heard the last session, there was an awful lot about online groceries. Having worked at Walmart when they rolled that out, I'm very intimately involved in online groceries, and I was an early adopter in that space. And Wegmans has now, at least in our neck of the woods, gone to scan and go, which is just fantastic to go through a Wegmans or a Sam's Club and be able to scan stuff on your phone and get out of there. Banks aren't exactly innovative. We've been around for 150 years. The products that we offer are pretty. They're pretty typical. There's nothing real sexy about opening a bank account or taking out a mortgage. And so really what I'm seeing are a couple things. Number one, we were able to innovate in a couple of areas. And again, I think the previous panelists touched on this in terms of, your IT department was more willing to go along with things. Our HR department was more willing to go along with things. Budget seemed to be a little bit easier to secure during COVID, when everybody's scrambling to figure out how do we communicate with our people? How do we make sure they know what's going on with COVID precautions or their job? And so we were able to get into podcasting. It was not the most successful thing we've tried. We started at Benjamin with a focus on internal because we figured we could talk to our people. I don't know how big of an audience you're ever going to get doing an internal podcast. So we started to get some guests that could help us position the show externally. So we're still thinking through what the right play for us is there. But I do see that on an awful lot with brands getting involved, whether it's, Clubhouse, so it's audio and it's voice, it's podcasting. So that to me is a trend that I think is going to continue to be explored. I've always thought, and I didn't say this, but podcasting is such an intimate one-to-one connection. And if we can find the right format for TD and we can get directly into people's ears, I think that's a place where we can go. I think the previous panelists were also talking about gaming and TikToking and user-generated content. Again, banks we're not going to take the first step into a place like TikTok or Clubhouse or some of these emerging platforms. I often wish that we would. There are brands that I'm envious of who seem to be early adopters on a lot of platforms, and I think that could be a lot of fun. It could probably be terrifying at times because you're out there without a safety net. So I do see some things happening there, and then I think one of the interesting things, I don't know if it's a trend yet, Benjamin, but when I think about the ways video production were just fundamentally changed during COVID and not being able to go out, and what I saw our visual storytelling team do, and from the start, when everything sort of looked like the Blair Witch Project, to something that we did this week for our spring management conference, it was one of those moments where I meant to pay a compliment to my team, and my email said something like, "I cannot believe the quality of these videos." And I was like, that might not have sounded like a compliment. So the ability to sort of train, non-practitioners to create really high quality video. I don't know where we're going to go, as the world starts to open back up. I know my visual storytelling team, they're desperate to get back out. They want to get out of the house. They need to go build the B-roll library. We want to go take shots of our bank and of customers. But I think there could be an element of video production that is going to not require as much out of house, support. I think there's a lot of things that can probably be done in-house for not a lot of money. You start to get your executives comfortable, you start to get people familiar with the technology, and I could see sort of an explosion there in the way that people are using video, and I think the user, whether it's our colleagues, whether it's our customers, there's a bit of an expectation there now, right? There's not an expectation, I guess I should say, that everything's going to need to be the Super Bowl ad, that some of this more authentic sort of shot from home stuff can be just as impactful as some of the highly produced content. So I think those are a couple things that I'm just seeing not only at TD but in some different industries.
Yeah. So you mentioned that quality of production is becoming more and more impactful thanks to the tool, and you guys are looking sometimes to bring that in-house. But also it's true for anyone with a phone now can produce very interesting piece of content that other people are likely to interact with. So tell us a little bit about influencer. Are you using them? Is it something you believe in? How do you see them fit in your world?
Well, my previous experience at Walmart, when you work with a retailer, influencers were much more a part of the strategy, whether it was the marketing strategy, whether it was the corp com strategy. And for what I do in corporate communications and public affairs, influencers are not high on the priority list. You're usually, if we're not doing brand stories, then you're doing press releases, you're doing corporate announcements, and you may not need influencers for some of that stuff. But I think there are cases where when we're talking about financial advice or financial literacy, buying your first home, what you should be thinking about with a 401k, there are some credible people out there who do have audiences. And I think, my sort of default approach to it has always been looking for micro influencers who have a much more intimate connection, who aren't just going from brand to brand to brand to product to product to product, but there's some deeper connection with TD. And TD is a unique brand in that our footprint is rather limited. We're from Maine to Florida. We're often thought of as one of the big banking centers, like a Bank of America or Chase or a Citi, but our footprint doesn't really allow us to be that big. And so when I've met people who say that they are a TD customer, it's a very strong connection. It's very meaningful, and they've been with TD for a long time. And if you can find people like that who are actual customers who then have some influence, that's where I think we look for the perfect marriage. And so we've done some things this year with the woman named the Budgetnista, who has done some things to support our Love and Money campaign. We had a new double up credit card that launched not too long ago where that kind of stuff works. But for the most part, I think when we're thinking about trying to tell brand stories through the eyes of our customers, I'm thinking in particular of Lambda Vodka, which we were able to tell of a same-sex couple up in Harlem who opened a vodka lounge in the height of the pandemic. They're influencers in their community, right? And so we've heard anecdotally that we've grown the business by telling their story. They were very complimentary to TD and very complimentary about the fact that we have an entire team dedicated to helping grow LGBTQ2 plus businesses, and they moved all of their money over to Walmart, over to TD. And we've heard now from that business team that as people see the story and hear these guys' stories, that it's driving business. And so in some ways, that's like the accidental influencer, or you find like, hey, these two guys are absolutely amazing. They've got an entire community of people who are listening to what they say.
Okay. So earlier you mentioned that you were envious of some of the brands who were using TikTok, podcast, and other new channels in innovation. So can you tell us a little bit more about those brands that you are watching closely, that are innovating, that are leading the pack, that you really admire?
Yeah, I mean, look, I've always loved GE. I think that early on when they did GE reports and they did some crazy stuff in the podcasting space, they've done some interesting partnerships with like the New York Times and Spotify and really sort of getting into things early on. I don't obviously don't work for any of these brands, so I can't speak to whether or not the content play help drive sales or whether it was to raise brand awareness, if it was just to build affinity. But GE is somebody that I've long looked at and wanted to be a lot like. It's hard not to love what P&G does. Thinking back to the Thank You Mom spot, to all of the things that they do now with diversity and inclusion, I think there's somebody that I look to all the time for creative inspiration. Ford, I've really gotten into Ford over the last year and a half or so. I mean, the brand film that they did to launch the Bronco, which is probably a trend we could probably talk an awful lot about, is the idea of brand films or brand documentaries. I consider it one of my somewhat failure at Walmart that I couldn't get it done before I left. We really had some really cool ideas for a brand film, brand documentary. So I love what Ford's doing with the new E-Mustang. I love what their CEO is doing on social. So I look to them. And then, Starbucks, great storytelling. When I think back to the Upstanders series that they did, they put a ton of money into content, and I think it shows. So those are some ones off the top of my head that appeal to me. There's niche brands that sort of speak to my personal hobbies, whether it's cooking or whether it's golf or some other things. But that's more of how they address a fan, as opposed to some of these other brands who I think are probably using content to build new fans.
Awesome. And I love the design of the new Bronco. They did such a good job.
Yeah.
With the design. Really
cool. And having watched Free Solo, to get him to then be the director, I thought just really fit, right? Like, it's totally his lifestyle. Again, I think the word authentic probably gets overused when it comes to content, but it was really authentic. I was just sucked in by that piece and loved every minute of it.
Free Solo, amazing documentary. Just when you say the name, I have goosebumps. Those images of him.
Yeah, my wife is terrified of heights, so I watched it alone. Nobody else in the family would watch it with me.
Makes sense. I want to ask a question and I want to make it very actionable for the audience. So this is more tactical, but can you share with us a few tips, maybe your top 3 tips to really create content that sells, content that's effective and efficient?
I don't think that you can begin to create effective or efficient content without knowing your audience. And so, to me, what I've tried to do since I've gotten to TD, because TD was a lot like Walmart was. TD was really good at telling stories about itself. TD was really good at talking about its business priorities, but really, I think the sweet spot when it comes to content, whether it's content to build brand or whether it's content to sell, is that you've got to find where your brand's values and where your audience's values and needs intersect. And when you can speak to that sweet spot and you can create that content that helps, that's the content that sells. And content that sells sometimes doesn't do what you want it to. So when I think about audience, it's, who are they? What do they need? What are their concerns? So like, we knew at Walmart there were some major reputational concerns that people had about the company. At TD, we've got a different set of concerns. It isn't as hardened, the opinions about us. So what are the concerns that we need? And then what's going to motivate them to buy? And in the case of a bank, is it opening an account? Is it taking out a loan? What is it? It's a different transaction, right, than sort of typical e-commerce. So I think that's the first thing that I start with is audience centricity. We are really trying to become data driven when it comes to storytelling, data driven content. And, a lot of times that goes counter to what your gut is telling you. You've got a ton of experience at Ogilvy and in social and a lot of other things. And I've got a ton of experience. And a lot of times we want our gut to be right. It's what's gotten us as far as it has in our careers. The data comes in, the data tells you something completely different, and you've got to do everything in your power to trust the data and go with the data. So I think that when we talk about effective content, it's knowing our audience, it's understanding what the data is saying about trends in our industry or what people are looking for. And then for me, it's about having the right process in place with our team. The content team, depending on where it sits in your organization, could sit in marketing, it could sit in corporate affairs, having a process in place, having guardrails so that we can create content through creative briefs and ideation briefs, and getting the content team at the table early enough in a corporate setting, I think is really important as well.
Thank you. And I love content that helps. Really cool. It's a really good catchphrase.
I mean, look, we're all looking for something. And in my case, I've had my sink break this week. I had to get 4 new tires on my wife's car. My wife just put my phone in front of me because my voicemail wouldn't work when I upgraded iPhones. Like, I needed content that would help. I didn't need content that was going to sell me another iPhone. I didn't need content that was going to, sell me a new sink. I needed to know how to fix a clog. I needed to know, so like that content that helps, that understands what the user's looking for. It works in every industry. Eventually, it's going to lead to a transaction, but you got to figure out where somebody is in the funnel. And if it's just sort of top of the funnel building brand, is it more down the funnel to specific products, or is it then sort of closing the sale at the end? Understanding where somebody is in their journey and getting them the content that helps them. wherever they are in that journey, I think is critical.
Yeah, I actually love the mindset of it because I think it's really audience first. It's an amazing way to always think about your audience as a starting point and really be helpful.
And unfortunately, I think in my experience in corporate America and talking to people in similar jobs in corporate America, I don't know that we always think of the audience first. You've got business goals and business objectives that you're trying to hit, and you know, you got to remind folks all the time that we got to be thinking about our audience.
True. I think we have 12 minutes left, and I want to cover some of the questions from the audience. So there is one that is really interesting. The question is about the different type of strategy that you may apply to reach your e-commerce audience versus your in-store audience. How do you make them evolve differently?
Well, you know, this last year has been really interesting. I think the previous panelists were having a bit of this conversation. So, you know, TD, we're actually suffering a little bit of you know, fallout from COVID because TD Bank in the United States is known as America's most convenient bank, and when you can't open branches and you can't be convenient and you can't be open the longest hours and you can't be open the most days, it really does dampen being America's most convenient bank. So there's a lot of that we want to try to reclaim, and how we get people back into the stores, which is what we call our locations, or if we're reaching them you know, via mobile or digitally. There's an awful lot of conversation right now about what that looks like and what our customers are gonna sort of default to and what their needs are going to be on the other side of this. And you know, we've done a lot of stuff recently where you know, one-on-one appointments have started to work, and there's a thought that we're going to bring back some of that and maybe move to that model, and then be more helpful through the call centers and through the online experience. So it's one of those things, Benjamin, that I think is still a little bit of a TBD as we're studying customer behaviors and starting to see trends and see, you know, what's going to be the new norm on the other side. And for us, it's always been that in-store experience. You know, we get huge marks from JD Power when it comes to you know, the likability of our colleagues and the friendliness of our colleagues, and that's really what we're known for. When you talk to people who interact with TD Bank, and it was the first bank to allow dogs in the stores, and it was the first bank to, you know, do a lot of different things, and so we've always had that convenience. And when that convenience is taken out, you know, what is that going to look like moving forward? And so I know that's a sort of a hot topic of conversation around the virtual water cooler these days.
Awesome. Another question, quite meaty, probably a question from a brand strategist. It's about something we hear about more and more since COVID, brand purpose. How do you leverage brand purpose into your marketing? How do you come?
Yeah, I mean, it's in everything that we do. And we were starting to see some of this before COVID. We had seen, you know, the business roundtable, and we had seen some of the more, I don't know, I'm going to use the word progressive. That could be the wrong word, but some more of the progressive or forward-thinking CEOs really starting to put an emphasis on purpose over sales. And I don't remember the timeline. The business roundtable shortly before COVID, I think, had all of their CEOs sign a pledge about purpose being equal to returning value to shareholders. And so it's incredibly important for us at TD. I think it's incredibly important for every brand, because what we're seeing across a lot of different demographics is that people want to do business with somebody that they share an attachment to, an affinity to. And I think a lot of times that is now beyond the ease of the transaction, and it's more focused around, what do they stand for? Do they stand for the same sorts of things that we stand for? And so we're trying very hard when we tell our stories and when we carry it into then what marketing does, is making sure that that purpose is apparent all the time. And so how do you work your philanthropy? How do you work your you know, your community partnerships into what you're doing? And as we're developing the strategy and we're thinking about how we're going to tell these stories, what's the right mix of business communications to D&I, social impact, community, and then how's the best way to tell those stories so that people understand what that purpose is, and what we stand for. And so it's absolutely critical. I wish I had a better answer than that, because I think back to and you and I might have talked about this, but back when I was at Walmart, I went to an event where I realized that what I had previously thought my competitive set was like Target, Amazon, grocery stores or retailers. And I realized it's everybody. It's Ford and it's GE and it's whomever, because there's only so many people out there and they only have so much attention to pay to all of this content we're trying to put forward. And so now most every company out there is talking about its purpose and its values and what it believes in and what it does in the communities in which they operate. So it's a very crowded space. We're all trying to get people to connect with us. A lot of companies have sort of the same purpose and values, and we just really need to do as good a job as we can as weaving that through all of the content that we create.
Thank you. Another big, broad question from the public, but it's from on the other side of the spectrum. We talked about brands. This is more about e-commerce and the future of e-commerce. What are the challenges and opportunities that you foresee when you think about the future of e-commerce?
I am the wrong person to ask because I don't spend a lot of time in e-commerce. I sat in a corporate function at Walmart. I sit in a corporate function at TD, and before that, I was in government and politics, and so I have not really spent a lot of time thinking about e-commerce as a practitioner. I guess I think about e-commerce from the user perspective, and as I alluded to earlier. The COVID has brought on a lot of massive innovation, in retailers, from online car buying to, home delivery of groceries to sort of an explosion of like ghost kitchens, because they're gonna deliver food, and that's all they're gonna do. So I don't have a great answer to this question. I don't know what the future is going to look like for the banking industry. I know the financial services and the fintechs, it's going to be a very competitive space. I don't know if people are going to start to move everything over to, online banks, if they're going to start to move into, the Robinhoods and the day trading kind of platforms. But it's just going to be one of those things we watch and try to adapt as best we can.
Yeah, and I think being able to adapt is very important. And maybe one of the key lessons from COVID. Last question from the audience. It's about data. Someone would like to better understand how you utilize data, how you plan it, if you have specific tools to do that, a framework, something really actionable you can share with us.
Yeah, so I guess I can share two things in terms of, when I left Walmart, I thought we were and I think they still are to this day, one of the leaders in using data, and whether it's first person data that they've got, whether it was then tracking how customers responded to content, and then whether it was driving basket size, whether it was having a noticeable increase in the company's perception and reputation. There were data pipes all over the company, and they were being fed into dashboards for every business line so that you could see what you needed and how it all came together to help inform business strategy. For us at TD, we're at the beginning of the journey, and so it's been interesting to sort of go backwards and try to solve a different problem, because the problem statement that we have and the reason that we would want to get our hands on data is to solve a different problem than what we were solving for at Walmart. We don't have the reputational baggage at TD that we had at Walmart, and so we're not trying to solve sort of these gigantic reputational problems. We're trying to shore up our reputation as a credible deliverer of financial advice. Like I said earlier, we've got to reclaim that title of America's most convenient bank. And so you're looking at data sets from customer anecdotals. You're looking at data sets from people who are engaging with your content to see if you are in fact shifting hearts and minds. And so I think there's sentiment analysis tools that we use for content. There are some of the old sort of first generation metrics that are still valuable directionally when you're looking at web traffic and web performance, but getting now under the hood and really understanding how you use a content intelligence platform, and then how do you tie what you're doing in corporate affairs, which is really, around owned and earned media. Most corporate affairs teams are not playing with the budgets that marketing does. And so paid is really more of the marketing team's responsibilities, but understanding the attribution modeling and the media mix modeling to see, what's the value of a press release? Did this earned media drive paid? Did it convert? So those are the sorts of things that we're trying to use data to solve. I think number one, using data to understand, is the content that we're creating performing the way that we want to and having the resonance that we want with our target audiences? And then two, we want to be able to use the data sets to be able to understand the full picture of what owned, earned, and paid looks like across the business. That's just as important for marketing as it is for us. And really, you say then, well, what do I need data for? Why do I need to prove it? Well, I think you need to be able to prove the value of your content to go get more money to create more content. So we like our content. We think our content is nice. We think it's doing the thing that we want it to, but we have no proof other than anecdotal. So you got to get the right data sets and the right, like I said earlier, the right content intelligence platform in place to tell us that, yeah, when people see this content, it is shaping hearts and minds, and it's then driving to conversions, because that's ultimately what we want, is to drive more consideration of TD and ultimately more accounts, more new customers, and retain the existing customers that we have.
Awesome. Well, we have 2 minutes left. Is there anything you would like to say to close this conversation that we would have missed?
Boy, that's an open-ended question. And as a talker, I could probably now, filibuster for the next hour on whatever topic I so choose. No, I think you and I have been able to cover off on a number of things. I hope this was valuable for everybody who's paying attention. I always am a little bit of the odd duck in these conversations. I'm not a marketer. I sit in a corporate communications function, but I do think that if marketers and corp comms got together more often and were more strategic in what they do, that whatever brands they work in would be better off for it, because they're different disciplines. But I think that when they're done in partnership and when they're done together, it drives fantastic outcomes.
Awesome. Thank you, Chad. It was extremely valuable. Thank you a lot for playing the game. It was great.